They laughed when Nora Barlow inherited the collapsed ice house on Swan Lake, 40 years abandoned and appraised at $9. The roof had fallen into the North Bay. Every board on the lakeside had curled off its nails, and the stone pilings stood in the water black with rot. Her brother Warren took the timberland and the accounts. Her sister Edith took the house on Cold Spring Road. $2,140,000, split clean between them. Warren called her share 40 tons of wet sawdust with a roof on it. Edith did not look up from her phone. 9 weeks later, a man from an archive nobody in that family had ever heard of stood in that sawdust with a flashlight and did not speak for 11 minutes. What was under her boots was worth $4,317,000. Warren had already sold the timber before the will was read. He signed the paper in the parking lot and kept the pen. Edith had the house cleaned and staged in 6 days. She left one thing on the porch for her sister, in a milk crate, in the rain, a wool cap and a pair of ice tongs. Nora was 26. She had $58, a room she had to be out of by Sunday, and a key so cold it burned her palm. The county had already scheduled the building to be torn down. She was given until the first hard freeze, 61 days. She went out there anyway. She walked the length of the storage bay in the dark, ankle deep, then knee deep, and the sawdust was not settling under her feet the way sawdust settles. Something under it was flat. Something under it had corners. Her grandfather Elmer had locked that door in 1994 and never explained why a man would padlock a building the town had already forgotten. He had spent 7 winters cutting ice on that lake with 411 other men, and he had come home every single night with his coat pockets full of something he would not show anyone. Not once in 7 years. Not to his son, not to anyone. What was he carrying home in the dark? The lawyer kept his office above a hardware store on Main Street in Belfast, up a staircase that had been carpeted once, in some other decade. Warren got there first. He took the chair at the head of the long oak table and set his phone down, screen up, where it would be seen. He wore a camel wool topcoat over a navy suit and a gold signet ring he turned with his thumb while he waited. Edith came in 8 minutes later in a cream cashmere coat and did not take off her leather gloves. Nora sat at the far end in the only black dress she owned. The price tag was still folded inside the collar. She had meant to return it. The lawyer's name was Harlan Pike. He was 71 years old, and he had been drawing up wills in Waldo County since 1962. He read the way a man reads names off a memorial, slowly, and with no music in it at all. The timberland went to Warren, 211 acres off the Searsport Road, the standing hardwood, the woods roads, and the gravel pit at the back of the lot. The house on Cold Spring Road went to Edith. The house, the contents of the house, the land under it, and the accounts at Waldo County Savings Bank. $2,140,000, split clean between them. Warren was already writing a number on the back of an envelope. Edith turned her phone face down on the oak, looked at the ceiling for a moment, and turned it back over. And to my daughter Nora, Harlan read The Ice House on Swan Lake, and everything in it. The room went quiet. Warren looked up. "That is all of it?" he questioned. "That is the clause," Harlan replied. "Then say the number." $9, Harlan said. The county assessed the building at $9. Warren laughed. It was not a cruel laugh, and that was somehow worse. It was the laugh of a man who has already done the arithmetic and found nothing in it worth arguing about. 40 tons of wet sawdust with a roof on it, he said. Edith did not look up. Harlan slid 2 things down the length of the table. A tax valuation printed on green paper and a key. The key was iron, 4 inches long, and it had been lying in a drawer in an unheated office since February. It burned her palm when she closed her hand around it. Stapled to the valuation was a second sheet, and the second sheet was the one that mattered. The county had condemned the structure in October. Demolition was scheduled for the first hard freeze, when the ground would carry the equipment. 61 days. Warren stood up before Harlan had finished the last page. He shook the lawyer's hand, said something about the drive back to Portland, and was gone. Nora watched him through the window. He signed the timber contract on the hood of his car in the parking lot, in the rain, and put the pen in his coat pocket. 6 days later, Edith had the house on Cold Spring Road emptied, cleaned, and staged with rented furniture. She never called. She left a milk crate on the porch with 2 things in it: a wool cap gone shapeless at the band, and a pair of ice tongs, 30 inches of forged iron, the handles worn bright where 4 generations of hands had closed on them. The crate sat out in the rain for 2 days before Nora found it. She drove back to the motel on Route 1, where she cleaned rooms on the early shift, 11 rooms a morning, and she sat on the bed with the tongs across her knees and did the only arithmetic she had left. $58 in the account at Waldo County Savings. A room she had to be out of by Sunday. 61 days on a building the county had already sentenced. She had been 9 years old the last time anybody in her family had said her grandfather's name out loud, without changing the subject. That was in 1984, and she could not remember a single thing about the day except that her hands had been cold. The lawyer waited until the door closed behind them, then took a second envelope out of the drawer. He called the motel the next morning and asked her to come back alone. The office looked smaller with only 2 people in it. Harlan had put the long table between them out of habit, and then, halfway through, got up and moved to the chair beside her instead. He set the envelope down on the oak, gray wax, unbroken, with a thumbprint pressed into it while it was still soft. "Your father left this with me in the spring of 2001, he said, 11 days before he died. For me, for you, and only if you took the building. He knew I would take it. He knew you would be the only one who would," Harlan confirmed. Inside the envelope was a second key, brass, no longer than her thumb, tied with fishing line to a flat brass tag cut in the shape of a cod. On the back of the tag, somebody had filed 3 shallow notches, the way a man marks a thing he intends to find again in the dark. There was no letter. There were 3 lines on a half sheet of paper, in her father's hand, and they read as instructions rather than as goodbye. "Be in Belfast before Friday. Ask for Nell Harper at the photography shop on High Street. Do not sweep the sawdust." Nora read it 3 times. The 3rd time she said it out loud, in a room with another person in it, which is a different thing than reading. "Do not sweep the sawdust," she said. "That is the whole letter." "Your father was not a talker," Harlan replied. "He spoke to me less than 300 words a year. I counted 1 year. I was 15. The old man did not offer her anything for that. He let it sit on the table between them where it belonged. Her mother had died when Nora was 11. It had taken 14 months, and it had taken everything in the house with it, and the man who came out the other side of those 14 months was a man who kept the wood stove going, kept the truck running, kept the accounts square, and did not speak. Warren had been 19 and already gone to Portland. Edith had been 16 and packing. Nora had been the one who stayed. She had stayed through 8 winters of a house with 1 lamp on in it. She had learned to read a room by the sound of a man setting a cup down. She had gotten very good at being no trouble at all, and by 26, she had a motel job, a truck, $58, and no idea that any of it had ever been noticed. "There is one more thing," Harlan said, "and then I have discharged my obligation, and I can talk to you as something other than a lawyer." He unlocked the low drawer and took out a ledger. Brown leather, swollen with damp and dried again, the corners rounded off by handling. It was not a business ledger. The columns had been ruled by hand, with a straight edge and a pencil, and the entries went back to the 1890s in 4 different hands. "Your grandfather left this in my care in 1994, 8 days before he died." "What is it?" "Names," Harlan said. "It is 411 names." He opened it near the back, at a page that had been marked with a strip of birch bark, and turned it around so it faced her. The last entry on the page was not a stranger's name. It had been written in Elmer Barlow's heavy pencil, pressed hard enough to emboss the page underneath, and it was dated the 11th of February, 1984. It said, Nora Barlow. Her name was in that ledger in her grandfather's hand, and she had never once been inside that building. She was out of the motel room by Sunday. It took her 11 days to be ready to drive out to the lake, and every one of those 11 days came off the 61. She loaded the truck on a Tuesday morning. It was a 1989 Ford F-150 she had bought for $1,100 in cash from a retired mail carrier near Searsport, and it took the frost heaves on Cold Spring Road the way an old horse takes a hill, slowly and without complaint. 2 miles of alder. Then the trees opened. The ice house stood out over the water on its stone pilings, 190 feet of gray timber, with the North Bay fallen in on itself and the lake showing through the ribs. High on the gable, where 40 years of weather had scoured the paint down to a ghost, she could still read it. Barlow Ice, EST, 1891. The padlock had rusted into one piece with its own shackle. She worked kerosene into it with a rag for 20 minutes, and then the iron key went in and stopped, and she stood there with her hand on it, not turning it, for longer than she could later account for. Then it turned. The door came off its swing, and the building breathed out at her, and the air that came out was 15 degrees colder than the air she was standing in. Pine sawdust first, dry and sweet, the way a mill smells in August. Under that, salt. Under the salt, cold kerosene. And under everything, iron. Inside, the light came through the plank gaps in blades. It fell across a floor of pale sawdust that ran the whole length of the storage bay and lay 2 feet deep, level as a poured floor, undisturbed since before she was born. She stood in the doorway a long time. Then she sat down on the sill and took her boots off, and her socks, and she walked out onto that floor barefoot in the middle of November, because she wanted to feel what her feet were standing on. It was not level. 9 feet in from the loading door, her right foot found a dish in the plank underneath. A smooth, worn hollow about the size of a dinner plate dropped 1/4 of an inch below the boards around it. She knelt down and cleared it with her hands. The wood in the hollow was polished like the handle of a tool. The hollow her bare foot found in that plank had been worn there by somebody standing in exactly one spot, for years. She started digging where she was standing, because that was where he had stood. She dug with her hands. There was a scoop shovel hanging on the wall, and she did not use it, because whatever was under there was flat and had corners, and a shovel finds things by breaking them. The sawdust came up in shelves. The top 4 inches were dry and loose. Below that it packed into slabs that held the shape of her fingers, cold and faintly damp, and it smelled stronger the deeper she went. Pine, and then the sharp, clean smell of the ice that had been gone from that room for 40 years. It took her 4 hours. If you have come this far with Nora, subscribe, because there is a new one from the ledger every week. And tell me in the comments, what is the oldest thing in your house that nobody can explain? The light went from blades to bars to a single orange line along the top plate, and she worked past it with a flashlight in her teeth. Her knuckles found the first crate at a depth of 22 inches. It was zinc. Not a wooden crate lined with zinc, but a box built out of sheet zinc entirely. The seams folded and soldered shut all the way around, the size of a case of milk bottles. There were 7 of them in a row, laid shoulder to shoulder like something being kept rather than something being stored. Stamped into the lid of each one, in letters an inch high, Barlow, 1891. She cut the first one open with a pocket knife along the solder line, and it took her 40 minutes, and it opened with a sound like ice going over in the spring. Inside were glass plates. They stood on edge in slotted racks, each one in its own paper sleeve, gone soft as cloth with age. Dry plate negatives, 5 inches by 7, the emulsion still holding. She counted the first crate twice, and then counted the rest by the racks. 411. There was a leather ledger laid flat across the top of the last crate, the twin of the one in the lawyer's drawer. Beside it, a bundle of letters tied with a ribbon that had been blue once. She drove into Belfast the next morning with one plate on the passenger seat, wrapped in a bath towel, and she drove 31 miles an hour the whole way. The photography shop on High Street had been a photography shop since 1938. Nell Harper was 78 and had run it for 51 of those years, and she took the towel off the plate on the counter without saying anything at all. Then she carried it to the front window and held it up against the November light. She looked at it for 11 seconds. Then she pulled a stool out from under the counter and sat down on it, hard, the way people sit down when their knees have made the decision for them. "How many?" she said. 411. "Say that again." 411, Nora said. "There are 7 crates." Nell did not answer her for a while. She was looking at the plate and not at Nora, and her thumb was moving very slightly along the edge of the glass, the way you touch something you have been told about but never expected to see. "Sit down," she said. "I have to make a telephone call, and I am going to say a number to a man in Portland, and I want you sitting down when I say it." She said it into the phone with her back turned, and Nora heard it anyway. "Low 7 figures, Nell said. "And I am being careful. 411 men went out on that ice, and every one of them had a face." Her grandfather had spent 7 winters making sure that a company which paid them nothing could never be the one to say what they looked like. The rest of what came out of those crates is a longer story than one night can hold, and it is coming. If this one reached you, stay with the ledger. There are 411 names in it, and we have only read one. Until we meet again on the next quiet road.